The doctor's words were still echoing in my head when I walked through the front door that evening. "It's serious, Mrs. Keller. We'll need to start treatment immediately." I remember gripping the paper in my trembling hands. The diagnosis felt heavy, like a quiet sentence I didn't deserve. When I told my son Ethan, I thought he'd rush to comfort me. I thought maybe he'd hold me like he used to when he was little, crying after a nightmare. But instead he looked at me and smirked. "Well," he said with a chuckle, "I guess you better hang in there for at least 3 more months, Mom. The house market's good right now. Would be nice to sell this place while it's still worth something." The laughter that followed wasn't nervous. It wasn't awkward. It was real, careless, cruel, like a blade twisting into my chest. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I stared at him, hoping he'd realize what he'd just said. But he didn't. He walked away, still smiling, still scrolling through his phone as if I were nothing more than a bad investment. That night I sat alone at the kitchen table, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. The walls of that house, the one I'd built, painted, decorated, and kept alive, suddenly felt foreign. They'd heard laughter, birthdays, lullabies, and now they'd heard betrayal. As the tears came, I realized something that cut even deeper than his words. I had raised him. I had raised this man who could joke about his own mother's death for the promise of money. What had gone wrong? Where did I fail him? The next morning I looked at my reflection in the mirror, pale, tired, sick. But behind the exhaustion, something new was forming. A spark. If my son only saw value in what I owned, not in who I was, then maybe it was time I reminded him, and everyone, that I wasn't done yet. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Hi, Claire," I said when my old friend answered. "It's been a long time. I could use some help and maybe a plan." And in that moment, I smiled for the first time since the diagnosis. Because if I only had a few months left, they weren't going to go how Ethan expected. The next morning, the sunlight slipped through the curtains, spilling across the kitchen table, the same spot where Ethan's cruel words had shattered my heart the night before. The house felt colder now, quieter, like it was holding its breath with me. I brewed a cup of coffee and opened the folder the doctor had given me. My diagnosis stared back, stage 3. Manageable, but uncertain. That word echoed in my mind, uncertain. I wasn't ready to die. Not yet. But I was done living like a shadow in my own life, especially to a son who measured my worth in property value. Around noon, I grabbed my purse and the old folder where I kept all the house documents. I didn't tell Ethan where I was going. He was too busy watching some reality show in the living room, his laughter echoing down the hall. When I stepped into Mr. Larson's law office, the familiar scent of old books and coffee hit me. He had handled my husband's estate years ago, a kind man with soft eyes and sharper wisdom. "Margaret," he said, rising to greet me, "it's been a while. What brings you in today?" I smiled faintly. "Something overdue. I need to make changes to my will." His pen paused. "Changes?" "Yes," I said, sliding my hands across the polished desk. "Big ones. My son, Ethan, he doesn't deserve a cent of this house. Or anything else for that matter." Mr. Larson looked at me carefully. "Are you sure, Margaret? That's quite a decision." I took a deep breath. "He told me yesterday, joked actually, that he hoped I'd live just long enough so he could sell this house. My home. The place I raised him in. So yes, I'm sure." There was a silence, heavy and respectful. Then he nodded slowly. "All right. We can start by establishing a living trust and transferring ownership where you'd like. Do you have someone in mind?" I hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Maybe not family this time. Someone who actually cares about me, not what I have." That night when I came home, Ethan didn't even ask where I'd been. He was too busy on the phone, laughing with his girlfriend about the things he'd do once the house was his. I sat quietly on the couch, watching him, my heart aching but no longer breaking. Every cruel word he spoke was another nail in the coffin of my sympathy. He didn't know that while he was laughing about my house, I was already building a plan that would leave him speechless. In the corner of the table, the folder from Mr. Larson sat closed, inside it my new will. The first piece of my quiet revenge. And as I looked at Ethan that night, I whispered to myself, 3 months, huh? Let's see who really runs out of time first. Claire met me at the corner cafe like she always did. Steady, punctual, the kind of friend who'd held my teacup the night Harold died and didn't flinch when I cried. She looked at me now and without preamble asked, "How are you really?" I told her the truth. I told her about the diagnosis, about Ethan's joke, the words that had sounded like a verdict, and about the knot in my chest that had settled into a hard, cold determination. Her mouth hardened for a second. "That boy," she said. "He doesn't get to measure you in square footage." Claire surprised me then. "I didn't come here by accident," she said. "I'm not just a friend anymore. I run a small trust office with an old partner. We help people protect what matters. If you want, I can help you make sure he never gets his hands on this house, or anything else." I almost laughed out loud. "Claire, I barely know how to online bank. You'll take one look at my paperwork and faint." She smiled. "Then let's make your arrangements idiot-proof." We spent the afternoon in a corner booth, the world outside the window a blur of shoppers and the last of summer's heat. Claire asked questions I hadn't thought to answer. Did I want to keep living here for as long as I could? Did I want to provide for anyone else? Was I angry enough to make a legal snare? Each question was a little scalpel, precise and painful, but also clearing away the fog. By the time we left, we had sketched a plan that fit the shape of my hurt and my heart. Claire would act as trustee if I created a living trust. I could be the beneficiary for life, meaning I would keep living in the house and receive income as long as I lived. But the remainder, the thing Ethan coveted, could be directed elsewhere when I was gone, to the community center that taught Harold woodworking to boys after school, to a scholarship fund for local kids, or to my book club that knitted blankets for hospital babies. I could even set conditional gifts. If Ethan wanted any share, he would have to complete a program, financial counseling, steady work, and documented acts of support over 2 years. Harsh? Maybe. Satisfying? Absolutely. "People set conditions all the time," Claire said gently. "It's legal. It's tidy. And it sends a message: you don't get to inherit entitlement." But the legal move was only half of it. Claire tilted her head. "How do you want this to feel? Do you want him humiliated? Or do you want him to learn?" Her eyes were kind but firm. "Because humiliation is a quick burn. Learning lasts." I thought about the nights I'd waited up for him when he came home from college, the laughter that once filled this house, the quiet tiny hands he used to fit into mine. "I want him to learn," I said finally. "I want him to know what it means to be responsible for someone else." She nodded and wrote that down. We also closed loopholes. Claire helped me make an immediate change, revoke any joint access Ethan might have had, move accounts into the trust's control, and sign a durable power of attorney, not to a family member who might be tempted, but to Claire herself for the limited purpose of managing payments to me if I became too sick to handle them. It felt strange to give control to anyone, but it felt right to give it to someone who loved me and respected what I built. As we sipped the last of our coffee, Claire reached across the table and took my hand. "You built a life worth protecting, Margaret. Let's protect it, and if he wants it back, he'll have to earn it." For the first time since the doctor's office, the loom of fear frayed a little. There was work to be done, papers to sign, a trust to fund, but there was also a plan that was mine. A plan that said I would not be counted out. And somewhere under the warmth of that determination, a small, fierce thread of peace began to grow. The first few weeks after meeting Claire felt peaceful. Almost too peaceful. For once, I didn't feel like I was drifting helplessly through my own life. Every morning, I'd wake up, take my medicine, brew coffee, and sit by the window while sunlight spilled across the dining table. The same table Ethan once slammed his fist on when he didn't get his way. Now it was covered with legal documents, bank forms, and small, neat notes written in Claire's handwriting. Every signature, every form filled, felt like reclaiming something I'd lost: dignity, control, maybe even hope. Ethan didn't notice a thing. He was too busy planning his weekends, bragging to his friends about the inheritance coming soon, or tossing out little remarks like, "You should really think about downsizing, Mom. That big house isn't for someone your age." Sometimes I wanted to scream. But instead I smiled. Because deep down I knew something he didn't: the house wasn't his anymore. Not even close. One evening, as I sat in my favorite armchair knitting a blanket for the local hospice, Ethan came in holding his phone, laughing. "Hey, Mom," he said between chuckles. "You'll love this. I was just telling Jenna that when you're gone, we'll turn your room into a mini theater. You know, since you've got that nice view." The needles froze in my hands. My heart twisted, but my face stayed calm. "Oh, that's nice, dear," I said softly. "I hope you make it cozy." He grinned, kissed my forehead absent-mindedly, and left. When the door closed, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. The tears came, hot and angry, but not hopeless this time. They were cleansing. Later that week, Claire stopped by with a folder. "All done," she said, placing it gently on the table. "Everything's finalized. The trust, the will, the transfer, all legal and binding." I opened it, staring at the first page. Margaret Keller Living Trust. Beneficiary, Margaret Keller, lifetime. Remainder beneficiaries, the St. Paul's Children's Center Fund. Not Ethan. Not his girlfriend. A children's charity. I traced the printed words with my fingers. For years I'd dreamed of doing something meaningful, something lasting. Maybe this was it. "You can still leave a personal letter," Claire suggested. "Something that explains your heart if you ever, you know." I nodded. "Oh, I will," I said, a hint of a smile forming. "But not now. I'm not done yet." The next morning I called the realtor, not to sell the house but to make a few cosmetic changes. New locks. A new mailbox. Some updated paperwork with only my name on it. Ethan noticed the locks but didn't comment. He assumed I was just being paranoid. And as the days passed, I let him keep thinking that. Because the best revenge wasn't shouting or fighting or arguing. It was letting them laugh. Until the day the laughter turned into silence. And that silence was coming, sooner than he could imagine. The weeks slipped by like a calm tide before a storm. My health was stable, thanks to the treatments and the quiet routine I'd built with Claire's help. Every day I woke up with purpose, small, deliberate acts of control that felt like reclaiming pieces of my soul. But Ethan was growing restless. He had started pacing more, talking louder on the phone, his tone sharp and impatient. One night, as I watered the plants near the front porch, I overheard him arguing with someone outside. "I told you I'll get it soon, okay? The house is practically mine. Mom's not going to last forever," he snapped, then lowered his voice. "Once I sell it, I'll clear the debt and we'll be fine." Debt. So that was it. I felt my stomach twist. My son, the boy who once cried when he broke a toy, was now buried under loans and lies, using my life as collateral. That night I sat at the kitchen table staring at a faded photo of him as a child, smiling, missing his front teeth, his tiny arms around my neck. Tears blurred the image. What had changed him? Was it me? Had I loved him too much, made him too soft, too certain that I'd always be there to fix his mistakes? Claire called the next morning. "You sound tired," she said. "I'm fine," I lied. Then after a pause, "I think it's time to take this further." She hesitated. "Further how?" "I want him to realize what he's losing before it's too late. Let's prepare a mock property notice. Something that makes it look like I've sold the house to a buyer. Let's see how he reacts when his greed meets reality." Claire chuckled softly, not in amusement but in admiration. "You're ruthless when you need to be, Margaret." "I learned it from life," I said simply. 3 days later, the paper arrived, an official-looking document stamped and folded neatly, stating that Margaret Keller's property was under closing review for a pending sale. Claire had arranged it through a friend who worked in real estate. It was real enough to panic anyone who thought they were next in line. I left it sitting on the counter where Ethan couldn't miss it. That evening when he came home, I heard his footsteps stop. Silence. Then, "What's this?" His voice cracked. I looked up from my tea, calm as ever. "Oh, that? I'm just making some changes. You know, getting things in order." "Changes? Selling the house?" His face turned red. "You can't do that. You don't even know what you're doing." I met his gaze, steady, firm, no longer afraid. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing," I said quietly. "For once." He stood there speechless, the color draining from his face as he realized something had shifted. The certainty, the smugness, gone. When he stormed out, slamming the door, I didn't chase him. I just smiled sadly to myself. Because I had finally learned something he hadn't. Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to learn what truly matters. And Ethan was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The morning after Ethan discovered the sale notice, the house felt different. The air was thick, not with grief this time, but with tension. Every movement, every sound seemed amplified, as if the walls themselves were waiting for what came next. Ethan barely looked at me. He stomped around the house, muttering under his breath, slamming drawers and cupboards as if the noise would somehow undo what he'd seen. By noon, I found him standing in my study, rifling through my drawers. "Ethan," I said from the doorway, my voice sharp. What are you doing? He froze, the color draining from his face. I was just looking for your medication list. In case. Don't lie to me, I interrupted quietly. You're looking for the property papers. He said nothing. His jaw clenched, his eyes darted away. That silence was all the answer I needed. For the first time in my life, I wasn't heartbroken. I was cold. I realized right there that my son no longer saw me as his mother, just an obstacle standing between him and the money he thought he deserved. I walked past him, collected the papers he had dropped, and looked him straight in the eye. You've already buried me in your mind, haven't you? He blinked, startled. What are you talking about? You joke about me dying. You plan my house sale. You steal from my drawers. Don't insult me by pretending you care. Ethan's mask cracked for a second, replaced by something raw and ugly. You don't get it, Mom? You've had your life. I'm drowning here. I've got bills, debts, people waiting for money. So you thought stealing from your sick mother would save you? I thought you'd understand. He snapped. You always fix things. You always help. Why not now? Because, I said softly, this time I'm fixing myself. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the frame shook. I heard his car start a moment later, tires screeching as he sped away. But instead of fear, I felt peace. Because this, his desperation, his unraveling, was the proof I needed. Claire came over that afternoon. He's losing control, she said after I told her what happened. You sure you can handle this? I nodded. Oh, I can handle it. I just need one more step. She raised a brow. And that is? I'll make sure when he finally comes for what he thinks is his, he finds nothing left. That night, I opened my laptop and began drafting a new will. Everything, every cent, every asset, every inch of land, would go into a charitable trust. Scholarships for underprivileged children. A foundation for single mothers. A future that meant something more than greed. Not a single line for Ethan. As I typed his name under next of kin and wrote beside it, disinherited due to misconduct, I felt a strange calm. He had taken my money, my trust, my peace, but this time I was taking back control. And he didn't even know it yet. The next few days were eerily quiet. Ethan didn't visit, didn't call. A part of me hoped maybe the silence meant he was ashamed. But I knew better. Ethan wasn't the kind to feel guilt, only anger when things didn't go his way. On the fourth morning, as golden sunlight filtered through the curtains, the front door burst open. I jumped at the sound. Ethan's voice echoed down the hallway, sharp and trembling. Where is it? I didn't move. I was sitting in the kitchen, sipping tea. Where's what, dear? I asked, calm as ever. My inheritance. He snapped, stepping into the room, waving a stack of papers in his hand. You changed your will? You gave everything away? To strangers? I set my cup down carefully. Not strangers. Children. Mothers. People who might actually appreciate what they receive. His face went red. You're punishing me because I made one stupid joke? I stood, my chair scraping against the tiles. That wasn't a joke, Ethan. It was a wish. You wanted me dead so you could sell this house. Don't pretend otherwise. He threw the papers onto the counter. You're being dramatic. I didn't mean it like that. Then how did you mean it? I demanded, my voice trembling not from fear but fury. You laughed while I was coughing my lungs out. You said you hoped I'd only last 3 more months. What kind of son says that to his mother? He looked away, his jaw tightening. You don't get it, Mom. I'm tired. I've got my own life, my own stress. You don't know what it's like. I took a deep breath. You're right. I don't. Because when I was your age, I was working 2 jobs just to feed you. When your father left, I didn't complain, I survived. And when you failed your first business, who paid your debts? He said nothing. I did, I continued. Not because I had to, but because I loved you. And all I ever wanted was a little respect in return. Ethan's anger flickered, replaced briefly by something that looked like guilt, then it hardened again. You can't just erase me from your life, he hissed. You owe me. I owe you nothing, I said, my voice steady as steel. You made your choice when you treated me like a burden instead of your mother. He stared at me, shaking his head. You'll regret this, Mom. When you're gone and all your money's wasted on strangers, you'll regret it. I gave him a sad smile. I won't be the one regretting anything. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the walls. The echo lingered long after he was gone. For a long time I just stood there, listening to the quiet. Then I whispered to myself, he doesn't understand now, but one day he will. That evening I mailed the finalized will and trust documents to my lawyer, sealed, notarized, and beyond Ethan's reach. It wasn't revenge born of hate. It was justice wrapped in love, the kind that says enough is enough. And for the first time in years I slept peacefully. A month passed in quiet peace. I tended my garden, read my novels, and felt the kind of calm I hadn't known in years. The air seemed lighter, as if, by finally standing up for myself, I'd shaken off a lifetime of emotional weight. But then, one morning, my neighbor Clara came by with the latest gossip. She leaned on the fence, eyes wide. "Margaret, did you hear about Ethan?" My heart skipped. "What about him?" "He lost his job," she whispered. "Something about mismanaging company funds. They said he's been living beyond his means for years. New cars, trips, credit cards, it all caught up to him." For a long moment I said nothing. I just stared at the roses I'd been pruning, their red petals glowing in the morning light. Karma had arrived, quietly but right on time. Later that day I received a call from him. His voice was low, shaky. "Mom, I need to talk." I hesitated, but I answered. "What is it, Ethan?" He sighed heavily. "I'm in trouble. I thought I could fix things, but everything's falling apart. The bank froze my accounts. I might lose the house." The silence stretched between us. I could hear his pride crumbling with each word. "I know I said some things I shouldn't have," he continued. "I was stupid, okay? But you can help me, right? You still have the savings, the trust." "No," I said softly. He froze. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no, Ethan. I told you before, I already decided what to do with what's mine. It's too late." "Too late?" he shouted, his voice breaking. "You'd rather give your money to strangers than help your own son?" I took a deep breath. Those strangers never told me to die for their convenience. He went silent. I could almost feel his anger through the phone, the same entitlement that had poisoned everything. Then he muttered bitterly, "You'll regret this. When you're old and sick." "I am old and sick," I interrupted. "And for once I'm choosing peace over pity." The line went dead. That night I sat by the window, watching the sunset. For the first time I didn't feel like a victim, I felt free. The next week, my lawyer called to confirm that the community shelter had officially received my first donation from the new trust. They named a reading corner after me, Margaret's Light. I smiled through tears. That light wasn't just for them. It was for me, for every mother who'd given too much, loved too hard, and been treated like she was disposable. I didn't celebrate Ethan's suffering, but I didn't mourn it either. Life had a way of balancing the scales. And somewhere deep down I hoped that maybe, just maybe, losing everything would teach him the value of something he'd long forgotten: love. It was a cold morning when the knock came. The sound was hesitant, not the confident rhythm of a man who believed the world owed him something, but the shaky tap of someone who'd lost it all. When I opened the door, I barely recognized him. Ethan stood there, thinner, his once perfect haircut uneven, his clothes wrinkled. His eyes, once full of arrogance, now looked tired, desperate, and hollow. "Mom," he said softly, "can I come in?" I hesitated. My instinct screamed to protect my peace, but another part of me, the part that had once cradled him as a baby, couldn't say no. He stepped inside, looking around the small living room as if it were a relic of a past life. "I can't believe how quiet it is here," he murmured. "It's peaceful," I replied. "Quiet is a blessing when you've lived through enough noise." He nodded and sat down, wringing his hands. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice cracking. "For everything. For the joke, for how I treated you, for forgetting what mattered." I stayed silent, watching him. I lost everything, Mom, he continued, eyes wet. The house, the job, even Claire left me. Said she didn't want to babysit a broken man. I guess I deserve it. The confession hung in the air like a weight. I didn't come here for money, he said quickly, noticing my guarded expression. I didn't know where else to go. For the first time in years, I saw not the selfish man he'd become, but the frightened boy he once was, hiding behind guilt and regret. I took a deep breath. Ethan, I forgave you long before today. But forgiveness doesn't mean I'll forget. What you said cut deep. He nodded, tears slipping down his face. I know. I hate myself for it every day. When I said that joke, I thought I was being funny. I didn't realize it sounded like I was wishing you dead. I leaned forward. Words have power, Ethan. They reveal who we truly are, not who we pretend to be. He broke down then, sobbing quietly. I placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling years of anger melt into something softer, pity, maybe, or love in its most fragile form. I want to do better, he said through his tears. If you'll let me. I smiled sadly. Then start by being the man I raised, not the one life turned you into. He nodded slowly, his shoulders trembling. Thank you, Mom, for not slamming the door in my face. I squeezed his hand. This door will always open for you, Ethan. But next time, come home as my son, not as a stranger begging for redemption. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, spilling light across the worn rug between us. It wasn't forgiveness that healed me that day. It was finally being seen, finally being respected, even if it took everything falling apart for him to realize it. The days that followed Ethan's visit felt different. Not lighter exactly, just quieter, like the storm had finally passed. I could breathe again without feeling like my heart was caught between love and disappointment. He began visiting once a week. Sometimes he'd help me water the garden, sometimes we'd just sit in silence, sipping tea as the sunlight filtered through the curtains. He didn't talk much about his troubles anymore, and I didn't ask. Some wounds heal better when you stop touching them. I didn't trust him completely, not yet. But I saw effort in his eyes. The arrogance was gone, replaced by humility. Maybe losing everything had finally made him see the truth. Love and respect were worth more than any house or inheritance. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes, I found a photograph. Ethan, just a boy, sitting on my lap as we laughed in front of the Christmas tree. I stared at it for a long time, tears blurring my vision. Back then, I was his whole world. Somewhere along the way, greed and pride had stolen that from both of us. I placed the photo on my nightstand. It didn't hurt anymore. It simply reminded me that love, once real, could survive even the ugliest storms. Later that week, I met with my lawyer again. He smiled as I walked in. Mrs. Harris, I assume you're not here to change your will again? I chuckled softly. No. I just want to add something. He raised a brow. Oh. I handed him a folded piece of paper. I've set aside a scholarship fund for children who've been abandoned or forgotten. I want them to have a chance to build a life even when no one believes in them. He nodded, smiling warmly. A beautiful gesture. I hesitated. And I'd like Ethan to be the one to manage it someday if he earns that right. The lawyer blinked, surprised. That's generous. Not generous, I said quietly. Hopeful. That night I stood by the window, watching the stars glow over the dark horizon. My heart felt steady. Peace wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about reclaiming yourself after being broken by those you loved most. Ethan's joke had once crushed me. But now it no longer held power over me. In the end, it wasn't about proving him wrong, it was about proving myself right. That I still had worth, still had love to give, and that my story didn't end in bitterness. As I turned off the light, I whispered to the photo on my nightstand, "We made it through, didn't we?" The house was quiet but warm, filled with the kind of silence that means safety, not sorrow. And though time had taken much from me, it had also given something precious in return: the strength to forgive, the wisdom to protect my peace, and the courage to live for myself. If you think this was shocking, just wait until you hear how karma found the next person who tried to cross me.